Welcome to AMG Academy. Get ready to dive into a vibrant community where insurance professionals come together to discuss the latest in sales techniques, innovative business strategies, and the power of collaboration. Whether you're looking out for the next big trend in sales or seeking insights into strategic business growth, this is your hub. This is AMG Academy.
Hello there and welcome once again to another edition of AMG Academy. Matt McClure here with you. So glad you could join us this time around. Another great episode full of a lot of great information for you and your business. And to join me to talk about what we're going to talk about today, Devon Williams, Senior Marketing Manager with AmeriLife Marketing Group. Devon, how's it going?
Hey there, Matt. Always a pleasure to jump on these here. I'm getting a little more and more comfortable coming on to AMG Academy and having some new topics to, kind of bring to everybody. So excited to be able to do this once again here.
Yeah, excited to have you on as well. It's I think round 3 for you at this point in time. So yeah, get to be an old pro.
Exactly. I got my sea legs under me now.
That's right. You're steady and good to go.
Right.
But I say a great topic, and it really is a very good one today because we're talking about building a referral-based business. And, a lot of people, I feel like right now are, especially if you're new, if you're kind of breaking into the business, you really just sort of focus on, okay, I want to get some sales under my belt, which is definitely obviously understandable because you got to get started somewhere. But maybe you focus a little too much on leads and maybe then, turning that corner from leads that are not, necessarily as organic as referrals, but then you have trouble turning that corner to really kind of building trust over time with people. And that really is kind of goes to the core of what a referral-based business is, right? It's building trust with somebody.
Exactly. I think that's 100% correct there, Matt. From what I've got to see with agents and the brokers that I've worked with there, leads are only getting more expensive every year. We're seeing the cost continually to rise and rise. So, the days of being able to just purchase a 1,000-piece mail drop, get your return from that, make enough money to be able to reinvest in more leads. I think, especially as an independent agent, you can't just focus on one. You'd really have to be, a jack of all trades there. And that's why I think, making sure that you're spending time in developing a referral-based system as well, so that when you are in these conversations, you're getting the most out of them, making sure that you have a way, like you said, to really build that trust and become, someone who the agent trusts, the client trusts, not only for, maybe the insurance product that they're working with currently, but some other product lines that maybe you could bring to the table as well, and really being, that person that they go to for all their insurance needs there.
Right. And I think that is really where it does kind of turn that corner, is when you do build that trust, and then they may have relied on you for a life policy. They may have relied on you for a hospital indemnity. They may have relied on you for whatever they came to you for initially, but then just, building that rapport, letting them know that you have all of these other tools at your disposal that you can then bring to the table, I think is super important. And I guess the question is, maybe for a newer independent agent out there, okay, how do I then go about doing that? How do I just, it's not a switch you can turn on. I guess it's more of a process, right?
Right, exactly. And I think, as you go through the process there, at the very beginning, having these conversations where you're bringing up other product lines, or maybe asking for them to, introduce them to maybe neighbors or family and friends who could also use this support or service, might seem a little awkward. You might stumble over yourself a little bit, but, just like jumping on these podcasts, the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll end up getting there. So I think it's one of those things where as you do build a process and you're able to find, I guess, synergies in the products you're talking about, or, even just as you get more comfortable going over your full, conversation with the client, and that you are doing a great job in providing a high service to them, you'll see that they appreciate the value, and it'll just seem a little more natural to be able to say, hey, do you know anyone else who could also use the support? And I think, honestly, as you're doing the job and getting so comfortable at it, you'll start seeing the clients will say, hey, I have a family member who needs some help. Someone else actually reached out to me the other day, and said, hey, we just had a client call in, say they want to speak with, one agent in particular. The agent was like, well, we have some other agents around. And they said, no, if I can't work with you, I don't want to work with anyone else. And I think that's just the power of a referral there, coming from another, client or another prospect that you've worked with, rather than, how much money you could spend on a final expense mailer or, what have you when you're purchasing a lead.
Yeah, exactly. That is definitely worth the bang for the buck on that one. And when we say it's a process, right? But it can really the process has to begin somewhere, obviously, and it can begin with really the very first appointment with somebody. I feel like you can kind of start laying that groundwork. What are some things that maybe people can do, that agents can do to sort of lay that foundation, just beginning from the very start with somebody?
Yeah, I think one of the first things you can do, I guess it's a little different if you're face-to-face or if you're doing, internet-based sales. But I think making sure that you provide them with your license information. If you are able to, give them your license number or a copy of your license so they can quickly just identify that you truly are in the business, that you are a licensed professional here. And then behind that, I'd say just to see if you have, any other, maybe a website or some additional, maybe a business card that kind of shows a little bit more about how they can continue to reach out to you, where you're located and things of that nature. I think especially if you're face-to-face, if you can show that you're local, that you're in the community, I think that goes a long way from like establishing credibility there.
Yeah, and making a connection with people too, because you're right there in their own community. You're right there, being able to connect with them in a way that somebody who's maybe across the country might not be able to, because you might know some of the same people, or you might run in the same circles or whatever. It means a lot.
Exactly.
And, I feel like too, there are, at least in my own experience, when working with someone, really either on the agent side or as a client myself, the small things a lot of times can make a big difference, like a small gesture by an agent or another professional that you're working with can really make a huge difference in their impression, their level of trust and respect for you, and really can, I think, help build a rapport as well. What are some things that are maybe things that get overlooked by agents that they can just do, maybe small things, small gestures?
Yeah, I really think, one thing is like branding, just making sure that you have some personal agent branding that you're showing as well. If you're selling over the phone, if you can send them maybe, a link to a social media page, your business page, where not only do they see where, you are selling and, that you are in the insurance marketplace, but also just some personal information about you as well. Just as we were just saying, if they know that you're going to the local grocery stores or, you help out with maybe like a local baseball team or something like that, I think it goes a long way in them just understanding, in this day and age that, you're a real person, that this isn't just, like a transactional sale where I'm never going to hear from this person again. This is someone who, is really, passionate and committed to, being in the service industry and actually supporting those, agents there.
Yeah. I think I love that you bring up that term transactional. It can, it's transactional versus, being a trusted person for them, a trusted professional, rather than just a transactional relationship. And that really is a huge, huge difference and can make all the difference, I feel like, in someone's business. And if you're like me too, I feel like I am someone who, I'm not the pushiest person in the world. Like, just basically ask anybody that I ever worked with when I was in TV, when I worked out and I was, I'd go out to the field and have to like interview people. One of my least favorite things ever was to get man on the street, reaction to something, because I just like people were going about their business and I want to interrupt somebody, but so I'm just not the most pushy person in the world. So people don't necessarily, if you're like me anyway, want to sound pushy when you're maybe asking for a referral or you're trying to maybe nudge somebody along in that direction. How is a way that you can maybe time something like that? Maybe asking for a referral where you don't sound like you're, the used car salesman at the lot or something.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where, if you overthink it, then that's when it's going to start getting a little, complicated or convoluted there. I think as long as you just have the natural conversation and you really focus, I think, in your presentation on bringing as much value as possible to that consumer, really making sure that you're, spending your time explaining everything in full detail, not rushing through any of the process, going back and explaining things a second time if they feel a little uncomfortable. I think all of that stuff kind of, builds up to, at the end of the sale, when you can tell that they do feel comfortable with you or that they have built a relationship with you, then it's a little easier to come in and say, hey, by the way, this is something I do for my livelihood. So if you know anybody else who could use this support. I have no problem spending the same amount of time that I spent with you, making sure that they're comfortable with everything. And even if they have everything they need, just making sure that they have somebody that they can reach out to, later on. I think that just sounds like a more natural approach than, just kind of having some tagline at the end where you just say, and by the way, can you walk me over to your neighbor's house, and just, kind of throwing that in there no matter how the sale goes there. I think, really building up that value first and then trying to see, if there's a possibility for the referral solution.
Yeah. The other sounds like there could be a possibility in there of the beginnings of a comedy sketch of some sort. If it's might be on SNL or something, like how is goes, hey, can I get a referral?
Right, exactly.
Might not be the best. But yeah, I mean, and you sort of alluded to it there. I think a lot of times people kind of can get overwhelmed, and maybe if you're like me, you might not be the most organized person in the world. I am getting better with that in my life. But if you're maybe disorganized or you're maybe a little bit more overwhelmed, how do you start building sort of a system for something that is, simple and repeatable, so that I feel like if you are just sort of maybe more disorganized by nature, or maybe you get a little bit overwhelmed, having something that is as easy as possible and that you can repeat, it is the best case scenario, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I'd say, try to keep it simple, don't, kind of try to reinvent the wheel, when you are trying to start off and build a system where you are asking for these referrals. I'd say maybe something as simple as maybe having like a piece that you keep with your material that goes over, the review of maybe all the products that the client currently has, and has your contact information on the bottom, whether it just be a one pager or a booklet. A lot of the carriers have some marketing material that you can, kind of leave behind that will allow them client just to put in their policy information, and maybe just having a couple of those and saying, hey, I want to make sure you have this so you can fill it out, but I have a couple others that I'm looking to give out as well. If you have any family or friends, who would like to speak to me, just provide them with this. My contact information's on the back. Or just having maybe a very soft way to go into the conversation at the beginning. Something that, kind of is a call to action to you that you can, see it inside of your sales material and say, oh yeah, that's right. I want to make sure that I bring this up. So I think maybe just having a piece so that it is top of mind would just be a good way, for someone like ourselves who are maybe a little less organized, just to have that call to action or something to kind of, spark that back up in the, in this conversation.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. Just having that literally a physical reminder there of, this is, it's almost like having a, if you're doing any sort of advertising or marketing, having a call to action, that's your call to action for yourself,
Exactly. It's then.
That reminder, it's going to make that one moment.
Exactly.
100%. Well, and speaking of that and like me, maybe, trying to come up with a system or establish a system and a way of doing things, are there any tools that you would recommend as far as maybe CRMs or something that that agents rather can use to stay top of mind for particular clients?
Yeah, and this is something that I hear from a lot of agents out there. And there are a lot of CRMs that you can kind of purchase or, get a part of and have, all your information uploaded. And I think those work great, but because they're pricey, I would say, honestly, Excel can be your best friend. I think Excel alone will allow you to be able to have this information trackable. Again, you don't have to, try to go, completely robust with it and have all this different data there. You can just have something as simple as, the client's name, the policy that they, were approved with, maybe their policy number, and then their date of birth, and use that as just a CRM where you're seeing that date of birth and you're able to tap on them that way, but not trying to go above and beyond with having all this different data that you're trying to keep up with, and then it takes you so long to enter the data that you're really kind of almost business preventative and spending so much time worrying about keeping everything organized rather than being able to get out and actually perform there. So I think just keeping it simple, having an Excel spreadsheet where you do maybe have different tabs for different insurance lines, but just something that shows you everything in one place, and, don't try to overdo it.
Yeah. Keeping it simple, again, I feel like is great, especially if it's not something where, like if you're just doing it via, Excel or whatever type of, spreadsheet software. I think there's one that like Google has one that's all online as part of, Google Workspace stuff and all that. And then of course there's one that's on Mac and everything. So like, pretty much any sort of software developer or tech company has kind of their own. Excel is sort of the most widely used, obviously. But like, I think having something that and I guess maybe the advantage of that too is like you can have something where it's customizable for yourself. Like maybe there's a CRM out there that, yeah, maybe it works great for everybody else and it's, $1 million a month or whatever, but it might not work for you. It might be something that's more difficult for you to wrap your brain around. So if you've got Excel or whatever, you can actually customize all of the different fields and the different tabs and pages and everything, and have something that's easy for you to navigate, right? I think that's really important too, especially, again, if you tend to be someone who's not necessarily the most organized in the world, like having something that's yours means a lot.
Honestly, Matt, and I'm telling you, between YouTube and Excel, you could spend some time really deep diving into Excel and learning how to, do pivot tables. And there's a ton of different ways you can kind of play with the data once you have it there, where, it's a lot more robust than I think people really give it credit for. It's not just as simple as, maybe just throwing up a couple of data points there. But, it does allow you to have, a system that you can build out over time. And then if you ever get to a point where you do want to transfer this information, you can always then have it in an Excel format so that another, CRM team could work with it on uploading it. So I still think it sets you up for the future if you ever do want to, kind of get involved with the CRM down the road.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Great advice there. Well, and then, okay, so you've got maybe your system in place. You've met with, clients. You're starting to build your business. How do you then go about like keeping that sort of client relationship alive in the long term with, maybe individual clients, especially if you have sold them something like, say, I don't know, final expense, where it's not necessarily something that you're going to need to check in about changes on a regular basis or whatever. How do you sort of keep that relationship going and keep checking in again, I guess maybe without seeming too pushy about the whole situation?
Yeah, I think honestly, I think the clients would enjoy hearing from you just because of the relationship that you guys have built. Again, I think this is where, connecting with them on social media is a good, I guess, strategy as well there, where you're maybe not as, like pushing things, right in front of their face, but just having content out there saying, hey, doing free consultations when it comes to, this line of different products, and you can list things out on, your website there. Maybe just, having different advertisements that you run on your social media pages, or, talking about different product lines, whether it be like dental, vision, hearing, or cancer, heart attack, stroke, or maybe just some other products that they know are available, but just don't really realize that they have an agent or someone, a friend that they can come to and, get more information on it. So I think social media is a good way to just have that white noise out there almost, where they can kind of engage and see what other product lines they can talk to you about without, you having to send them an email or give them a call. But I think, doing a check-in maybe once a year, maybe every, twice a year, just to say, hey, just want to see how things are going. And, just bring up maybe what you've been doing for some other brokers in the area. Even in this last year or so, I think we've seen a ton of our final expense producers either move into the Medicare Advantage market or also into the annuity side of the business as well. So I think making sure as an agent that you're looking into these multiple product lines, that you are kind of keeping yourself versed on, some changes in the industry and things of that nature, even if you're just bringing up maybe a topic that they've heard on TV, and just keeping them, at ease on, what the future of Medicare looks like, or, what your take is on some things there. I think, you can have those conversations in an organic way, make sure that they do know that you're still available. And as long as you're keeping that relationship, I think just thinking of it as a relationship first, sales second, is probably like the best mindset of, being able to kind of continuously tap without seeing, I guess, too salesy or too pushy.
Yeah. Because I think that means the world of difference to clients in general, is just having someone who is sees them not as a number or a dollar amount or whatever, but they see them as a human being and connect with them as a human being, and can really just be there for them as that trusted source over a long period of time. I think is great. I know you sort of briefly mentioned one of these earlier, but are there any other maybe sort of examples that come to mind of someone who has had just like a great client experience that has, they've really been able to establish their business, because of a lot of referrals, or maybe like one particular referral that stands out to you that you'd like to use as another example here of really the way that this works and works well?
Yeah, I guess, because I'm talking to brokers all the time on the phone. So a lot of times when I'm reaching out, you'll hear from a number of brokers saying, leads, leads, leads. Do you guys have good lead vendors? What lead sources are you using? But, every now and again, you'll talk to some producers who will completely be devoid of wanting to use any leads. They'll be, completely referral-based. And one person I think of in particular is a broker that I was working with out of South Florida. And, when we started working together, he was kind of more focused on buying mail drops and actually, doing the 1,000-piece mailer systems. But once he started getting out there and not only writing final expense, but also writing Medicare Advantage and also ACA, the underage health side of the business, he found that he had such a large book of life clients already that he could go back on. He just stopped purchasing leads altogether. And then once he was able to kind of grow that book of business with those clients in the South Florida market, he's an Haitian individual. So he started a nonprofit, society there and allowed just free education around insurance, whether it be, to get your own license so that you could start selling, or if you're just looking for a place just to get some information just because you didn't know, kind of how to understand these product lines. And I think him doing that, he's now, doesn't even want to look into leads anymore because the nonprofit is feeding all the leads that he could ever want there. So I think just kind of looking into, I guess, different solutions or, different ways where you can be in the community and they can see you and have a way to connect with you. It's a night and day, system. I think when you're able to turn something like that on rather than having to keep, calling the same client 4 or 5 times before you reach them, getting a lead who's uninterested. We've all had, the horror stories of the lead. Actually,
yeah, no, it's very true. And it's a way to, through, if you're working through a nonprofit that you establish as well, I feel like it's also a good way to be able to give back to the community also and be able to provide that like a free resource for folks. And then it just sort of also naturally can lead to, leads and to new business for you as an agent. That's fantastic. Just sort of making that pipeline, building that pipeline yourself.
Right. Exactly. No, I thought it was genius, because he's also recruiting off of it if any of the, people there want to actually get their license and start selling as well. So it's feeding both sides of his business. He's helping out in the community. Yeah, he's, every year he does like a holiday party and I've just got to go down there every year and just watch it grow and grow and grow. And now I'm like, wow, we're looking at a good like 500 people here now. So it's just funny just to watch how many people he's been able to touch over these years there. So I think, definitely worth its weight in gold as you build it out. But yeah, just something that I didn't hear every agent doing out there that I thought was very interesting there.
Love that. Always great to see, success and the way that it builds in individual situations. And then maybe hopefully someone who is watching or listening to this episode of AMG Academy can take that idea and mold it to what fits them and what fits their business model, their personality and all of that. And maybe make, their business even more successful than it already has been. So that's awesome.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, I mean, I guess one other thing that I was going to ask is before I have to run here in a few minutes, if you had to, just boil things down to like a bare essential, maybe a piece of advice for agents that really encapsulates this idea of building a referral-based business, what would that be?
Again, I'd say, I know I keep saying it over and over, but keep it simple. I think having a defined process, like I said, maybe having a piece that you refer to when you're going through, your system there, making sure that the client, does have a relationship with you, whether it be you showing them that, you're a licensed individual in the beginning, you sharing your social media information with them so they know, a little bit more about you and the community as well. Whatever you can do to kind of just start with a natural process to build that connection. And try to stay organized as well. Try to have that CRM list where you are keeping that information, kind of visible and all together. And, starting small, keeping it simple, maybe just, getting comfortable with going through your sales process and, bringing these things up, asking about, different lines of business, making sure that you're asking for the referrals until you get to a point where, it is second nature. And I think, again, don't give up on it if it feels uncomfortable at the very beginning. It's one of those things where repetition will make things a lot smoother down the road, but it's going to be worth its weight in gold in the long run. And if you already are going to build that book of business, those clientele, you might as well spend the time and, make sure that you are becoming more of their trusted advisor and someone that they do want to send business to, whether it be different product lines or family and friends who might also need your assistance there.
Yeah. Use your time wisely. I love that. Well, Devon, anything else that we haven't touched on that comes to mind that you wanted to mention before we run?
Outside of that, if anyone wants to engage with any comments, in the video there, anything you guys want to share and add to the conversation, any topics that maybe they think that we should bring up next week in the future, or just anything they want to add on how referrals have helped their business, what they think about referral-based marketing compared to buying leads, any discussions that we can have, I'm more than open to them, and definitely want to engage with as many agents as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, subscribe, comment, do all the things. We'd really appreciate that. Wherever you find your podcast, or wherever you run into us on social media, on say Facebook, on YouTube, anywhere like that, we would appreciate all of the above. And of course, as always, I appreciate Devon Williams for joining me for this episode of AMG Academy. Devon, thanks so much. Really appreciate it, as always, sir.
Yeah, man, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Likewise. And thank you for listening and or watching this edition of AMG Academy. We'll see you again for another edition of the show.
Thanks for joining us for this edition of AMG Academy. For more information on any of today's topics or to contact us, visit AmeriLifeMarketingGroup.com.